Hey, everybody. So, my name is Jeffrey Griffin, and this is my presentation about the parallels between the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism, criminalizing hysteria, mental illness, and gender. So, criminalizing hysteria during the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism, people were persecuted because of panic and fear. Most of the time, accusations were made without solid proof, but based on rumors, guesses, and the need to keep the peace. People made other groups of people look bad, and civil rights were taken away because of the climate of fear. Criminalizing mental illness. People who were accused of witchcraft in Salem and communism during McCarthyism were often seen as crazy or mentally ill. People with mental illness were looked down upon and used as an excuse to target and exclude people who didn't follow the social rules. People who were accused of witchcraft or communism were sometimes thought to have mental illnesses, which made the accused even more evil. Then we have criminalizing gender. I'm going to close me so you can see the rest of this. Criminalizing gender played a big part in both cases, with women being more likely than men to be accused. Women who were accused of communism and witchcraft were often seen as questioning standard gender roles or posing a threat to society. Claims of communism and witchcraft were used to limit and control women's freedom and choice. So the Salem witch trials took place between 1692 and 1693, set in colonial Massachusetts during a time of religious fervor and social tension. So here are some key events. The accusations began in January 1692, when a group of young girls in Salem Village claimed to be possessed by witches. The accusations quickly escalated, leading to a series of trials and executions. The trials relied on spectral evidence, which allowed the use of dreams and visions as evidence of witchcraft. The trials ended in May 1693 after public opinion turned against the proceedings and the governor intervened. Hysteria and fear. The Salem witch trials were fueled by widespread fear and hysteria stemming from religious paranoia and social tensions. The belief in witchcraft was deeply ingrained in Puritan society, and any deviation from societal norms were viewed as potentially supernatural. Disproportionate targeting of women. Women were disproportionately targeted during the witch trials. Accusations often targeted women who were marginalized or perceived as threatening to the social order, such as widows, unmarried women, or those who challenged traditional gender roles. McCarthyism happened between 1947 and 1956. McCarthyism started during the Cold War when relations between the US and the USSR were very high. Many people were afraid of communism and thought that communists were trying to get into the American society. So, some important events. In February 1947, President Truman signed an order that required government workers to take a loyalty test. This was the start of what they called the Red Scare. People became aware of Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1950 when he said he had a list of communists working for the U.S. government. McCarthy held well-known hearings called the McCarthy hearings, where he falsely accused people of supporting communism without any solid proof. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Hollywood blacklist kept communists and people who supported them from working in the entertainment business. Fear of communism. During the Cold War, people were very suspicious and afraid of communism. Politicians and government workers used this fear to gain more power and shut down criticism. Extreme actions like violating civil rights and shutting down political opposition were seen as necessary because of the fear of communists getting into American institutions. So, the witch hunts for communists. McCarthy and his friends went on witch hunts for people that they thought were communists using methods that reminded people of the Salem witch trials. A lot of the time, accusations were based on weak proof, rumors, or guilt by association. Targeted and closely watched were people from many walks of life, such as the entertainment industry, education, the government, and more. Targeting people based on their political views. McCarthyism attacked people based on what they were thought to be their political views, not on what they did or who they were connected to. People with progressive or leftist views were more likely to be accused, even if they had a loose connection to leftist groups. Many innocent people lost their jobs, identities, and ways of making a living because they were falsely accused of supporting communism. How mass fear was used to fuel both the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism? Hysteria was used to spread fear and doubt during both the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism. In Salem, hysteria was caused by religious anxiety and social unrest. During McCarthyism, it was caused by the fear that communists would take over American society. During both times, accusations were often made without strong proof, based on gossip, guesses, and the need to keep things in order. People blamed certain groups for bad things that happened because they were afraid of communism and witchcraft. This made civil rights worse. Powerful people in both times took advantage of people's fears and worries to go after people they saw as a threat to the established order. How mental illness was used against people and made into a stigma in both contexts. People who were accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials were often presented as crazy or possessed. People thought witches were crazy because they thought they worked with the devil. In the same way, people who were thought to support communism during McCarthyism were often called psychologically ill or unstable. People sometimes thought that communist sympathies were the same thing as rebellious or disloyal behavior. This showed how people generally saw mental illness as a form of deviance. People who didn't follow social rules or question the status quo were shamed and pushed to the edges of society by using the stigma around mental illness. People sometimes thought that accusations of communism or witchcraft were connected to mental illness. This made the accused even worse and gave people a reason to hurt them. Gender dynamics during the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism. In both cases, gender played a big part, with women and people who didn't stick to the gender norms being especially likely to be accused and persecuted. During the Salem witch trials, women were targeted more than men, which shows how people felt about women's jobs and behavior in society in general. Women who were on the outside or seen as a threat to society were often the targets of accusations. Puritan society was dominated by men, and women were expected to be subservient and obey their men. This made people even more afraid of women who were strong or independent. Now, in the same way, people were accused of communism during McCarthyism based off of gender roles and expectations. Women who spoke out or were publicly active were often called communist sympathizers and were closely watched. During McCarthyism, people who didn't fit standard ideas of masculinity and femininity were also targeted. This included LGBTQ plus people and other gender nonconforming individuals. Women's freedom and choice were limited by accusations of witchcraft and communism, and upheld gender roles and kept things the same. So, what are the long term effects? Well, the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism changed the way people in America thought about justice, freedom, and human rights for a long time. Because of these events, civil rights had been taken away, marginalized groups had been shamed, and fear and paranoia had been spread. The Salem witch trial showed how dangerous it is to let panic get out of hand and use religious beliefs for political gain. McCarthyism showed how easy it is for politicians to take over democracy and how important it is to protect free speech and political criticism. So, how are these still present today? Though science and technology have come a long way, hysteria, shame, and discrimination based on gender are still common in today's society. When people are scared about things like terrorism or immigration and public health crisis, it can cause people to blame certain groups and take away their civil rights. People with mental illness, gender identity, and sexual preference will still face stigma, which makes them more likely to be discriminated against and left out. By thinking about what the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism left behind, we can now understand the fights for justice, equality, and human rights that are still going on today. This has been my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed.